Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Be More, where we inspire you to be a little bit more of every role within the Salesforce ecosystem. For this episode, we are talking Be More Developer Path, which is about getting people into the ecosystem as developers, or perhaps people transitioning into a developer type career. So, for today's session, I'm joined by Warren. So, Warren, if you could start by introducing yourself for us, please.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Tom. And hey, everybody. Warren Walters here. I guess I'm 18 times certified Salesforce MVP. I've been in the ecosystem for a little while now, probably getting close to like 9+ years. I've been doing development for a decent chunk, well, pretty much all my Salesforce career, but I went to school for development and just kind of fell in love with Salesforce. And currently, I am a Salesforce engineer at Blackthorn. So they are an ISV that has like event management and payment processing, and then some other stuff that I do. Right, I like to talk way too much about Salesforce development stuff. So I've got a YouTube channel and different programs and mentorship that I like to do.
Okay, awesome. Well, it's great to have you on today's session, and I know there's lots for us to dive in when we're talking about kind of getting people onto the developer track. So maybe you could start by introducing the role that you play in this within the wider community in terms of kind of getting people into a developer career.
Yeah, so for me, development has been like really great, and I've always been interested in it. And even from, I guess, a young age when I was in school and stuff, I did a lot of programming and computer science types of things. And I just like tinkering with stuff. And this kind of led me down a path of development and coding and all of that. And what I started to find out as I was going through this is that I like to, maybe I just like talking too much, but I like to share like what I'm working on and what I'm learning. So even back in like college, I ended up making like little tutorial videos on what I was learning because one thing you'll hear pretty often is if you can teach something, then you end up learning it a little bit more as you're explaining it to somebody that doesn't know what it is and how it works. So from my end, I kind of stuck along that path of just like sharing probably too much about development, and as I've
Mhm.
moved further into the Salesforce space, I continue to do that. So for me, I have my hand in a few different things, right? Like I have the YouTube channel where I share a lot of Salesforce development, and even I like flows too. So even like flow and that line of like what
Yep.
is a developer is getting mixed a little bit. But I share there on YouTube lots of content and really just trying to make sure that the community knows what's out there and kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit on development to know like it's not wizardry. I'm not a genius. People who code are not geniuses, right? It's just we spent some time learning the basic structures, and now we can put more complicated things together. Like just think about the first time you worked on a flow or even a formula field, like it was pretty confusing, but
Mm.
after the fifth or the sixth time, like you kind of get the basic structure and how it works. And coding is no different than that. You learn the basics and then you continue to run on with it.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, that's great. And I can certainly relate to ultimately wanting to play with the system to learn more about it as well. Do you think that's an important part of what you do and how you do it?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand all of the tools that are in your toolbox. Even though I
Mm.
am a developer at heart, I still use a lot of declarative and administrative type tools to solve problems. And I think for anybody, regardless of if you're a full time, like an actual developer or a consultant or even an admin or even a BA, right? Like literally all the
Yeah.
roles can benefit from learning these structures and how they work. If it's not just to communicate more efficiently with developers, you also know where the limits are, right? And how
Mm.
things play together. So I think it's really important, and I understand like I truly feel like everybody can learn the basics, and if you want to go even further down the line to like, become a developer. But I hear often like people are like, "Oh, developers are they're geniuses and they're wizards and all of these types of things," and it's like I understand that to a certain degree, but you have to kind of open the door a little bit more and not just
Hmm.
like not just peek through it, but actually open it and start to walk through to get that general understanding of how things work. It's not that scary at the end of the day.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. And does this typically remain within the Salesforce realm of products, or do you extend kind of into more non-traditional products like Marketing Cloud, Slack, Tableau? Like, how kind of broad is your scope here?
Think the world is your oyster at
Yeah.
that point. It's really fun because when you learn that foundational knowledge, like all programming languages are written pretty much the same. Like
Mm,
even when you think about flow, decision elements, and things like that, those can pretty quickly be translated over into Apex code.
yep.
Or I think Slack is written in JavaScript, and all of these different languages and concepts that exist. As long as you understand the foundation, you can move and transfer over to other platforms pretty easily, which makes you like really valuable as an employee and as a resource, right? Like you can potentially do multiple things, or if you want to switch careers, switch platforms, it's a little bit easier to get that done. But it is important to, in my mind, kind of focus in one area and get
Hmm.
potentially like kind of good, right? Which is why I focus on like Salesforce and Apex. But even in that little realm, it can go pretty deep, right? You talk about like T-shaped people and being like
Yeah.
the depth side of things versus the breadth. Definitely getting a breadth is good, but you can go pretty deep on like Apex and even Lightning Web Components, which are written in JavaScript, right? But learn
Yeah.
that foundation, and then you can kind of transfer out and see what you really like in those areas.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. And I think it is important to have those foundations because ultimately, from those foundations, as you say, you can spread and learn more. And maybe you've learned Apex, and then all of a sudden you're diverging into the Apex SDK for Slack, for example, right? There's room to move, right?
For sure. And one thing I want to bring up too is on just in like Salesforce's product suite as well. Like you
Mm,
mentioned, Marketing Cloud, which has development elements to it, but like even MuleSoft, right? There
yep.
are fully fledged MuleSoft developers, and I was fortunate enough back when I was consulting, right? I was a Salesforce developer, so focusing in on Apex, but I just landed on a project that needed a little extra MuleSoft help, and I got to learn MuleSoft, and it wasn't too big of a jump for me to pick
Hmm.
it up and make some changes because of that foundational knowledge that I had. So, yeah, I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of everybody should learn it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's great. That's good to know. So, diving in a little bit behind the curtain, as you said, into some of the great schemes and programs that you're involved in, are you able to tell us a little bit more about those?
I like how you call them schemes, right? Like I got
Yeah.
my tentacles like everywhere, and that's so true.
Yeah.
I often sign myself up for way too much stuff at the beginning of the
Mm,
year, and then I have to pull back. But yeah, I've got a few different things. So we've talked about the YouTube channel already. You probably, if you're on LinkedIn, you've probably seen my face a little bit, which is probably a good or a bad thing. But I also have a Slack channel called Salesforce Mentor, and I guess it's a blog too. But it's just really for anybody that wants to come in and talk development, learn development. It's very easygoing, and you can bring up any kind of development topics. And we have a lot of people that are transitioning from, okay, maybe you are an admin, you've been doing admin for a couple of years and you've heard a lot about development and you just have questions. So that's a very open spot. And then we also have tons of people who maybe they have development experience in other languages and they want to
mm,
start to figure out what Salesforce development is. So the Salesforce Mentor Slack, and I'm sure I'll share some of the resources with you in the links. But that one's totally available, totally free for anybody to
yep.
jump in on. And there, we also have a content club, which is, we spend a month reading some sort of development or Salesforce type of book. So just starting that out, and it's been pretty fun. And to see everybody kind of read along and go through these different resources that we're working on. And it's a content club so that we don't just focus on books, right? We'll also
Yeah.
watch video series and maybe do some Udemy courses and all of that stuff. So that's been pretty fun. And I got one more. I guess I'll just
Yeah.
throw it in there too, right?
Yeah.
So I do also run Cloud Code Academy, which is a Salesforce developer training program. So this one is definitely more in depth. It's like a 4 month boot camp style of training program. So you've got to kind of be dedicated and ready to like take that plunge. But that one's been going really great, and we it's a lot of time and energy that everybody puts in, but you do get a lot out of it if you really want to jump down that path and like you're really interested in learning Salesforce development.
Yeah. Okay, that's great, and I think there's some great resources and tips amongst that as well. So that's super. So in terms of this role perhaps being a non-traditional role, but thinking about it as somebody that's helping more developers enter the ecosystem or more people transition into a developer type role, how do you interact with other roles as part of that? Do you kind of engage with subject matter experts on certain things? Do you engage with other developers? How does that work out?
Yeah, I think there are a few areas or a few like key people that I try to interact with.
Mm,
One of those is just somebody who knows more than me on a particular subject, right? So if you are an administrative expert or you really understand like marketing cloud really well, like I'm not a
yep.
marketing cloud developer, but we can talk and have a conversation and understand like, okay, how does some of our roles or some of the things that we know overlap, and how
Mhm,
can we work together to kind of spread the word, right? Because I definitely am big on lifting everybody up and sharing
yep.
different resources that are out there to like of course like learn development, but if you're really into marketing cloud, like let's see how they overlap or how some of the things that you learn from development can then transition into it. And then on kind of the flip side, I like to talk to people that are just starting out to see what are their pain points, like what are you struggling with,
Mm,
and be that kind of liaison between, okay, let's take you from where you're at now and figure out what you're interested in, right? And of course I'm dangling like the here's development, like it's super great and I love it, but there's so many different things out there. Like watch this video, it might give you a taste of what it's like to be a developer. Check out these resources and maybe it'll help you see if you like writing code all
mm,
day long, because it's okay if you don't, if that's not interesting to you. um, but just learning those like background things and getting more awareness of what it's like is super, I guess, important to me. And I think it leans more on the like developer advocacy part. I think
yeah.
Salesforce like officially has a role for that. And I guess I'm like pseudo trying to do that kind of stuff. Maybe I need to like knock on their door and be like, "Hey, do you guys have a job for me?"
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just it's more just sharing the word and making sure that
Mm.
people understand what it's like to be a developer, and maybe seeing if you can put yourself in a dev's shoes, right? If you would like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's great. And touching on a little bit what you said there about kind of connecting with people and making sure that you're up to date on what's going on, like it's a difficult job market out there right now, right? So do you think that's increasingly important with the current kind of bleak financial and economic messages that are being painted?
Yeah, it is pretty important to make sure that you have as many skills that are employable, right?
Mhm.
So development is always at the top of that list that I've seen, and even with the slowdown, the dev jobs that I've seen are still out there, right? You can still
Yeah.
find lots of developer roles if you're looking on LinkedIn and stuff like that. Not to say that it's not competitive, but there's always been a demand for Salesforce developers or developers in general that I've seen. But it's really important to make sure that you're staying like current, up to date, and the types of skill sets that employees are looking for, you have those, right? Because it's maybe it's a good or a bad thing in terms of
Mm.
like, okay, maybe you're an administrator but you also have developer skills, right? So you're potentially wearing multiple hats, but you're seen as a resource that can do more things, right? You're technically a more
Yeah.
valuable resource in the company's eye, and but you just have these additional skills set that the company doesn't need two people, maybe they'll pay you, a little bit more money because you can write triggers or help debug some code errors that you're getting. So I don't. It's definitely not a detriment to have these dev skills. It's just like how
Hmm.
much do you want to lean on it, and
Yeah.
how much you want to be. I guess like I'm gonna say used as a kind of a negative term, but for me, I love like hybrid roles, right? Where I'm an admin and a developer because I think it's interesting to learn everything.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think there are kind of increasingly a number of roles like that, like in terms of technical consultant or almost something like in between developer and consultant, perhaps. So I think that's a great message there. In terms of all of this kind of developer career advocacy that you do, you work full time as well, right? How do you fit all of this in?
Late nights
Yeah.
and lots of coffee. No, I think I've built it into my routine to
Mm,
where it's a little bit easier for me to, and I'm a night owl, right? So if it's nighttime, like 10, 11, I'm cranking out maybe videos or a blog post or something like that. And I know that everybody doesn't have that kind of luxury of time, and I actually don't know how how much longer I can keep it up, but
yeah.
yeah, I think it's a matter of time and being passionate, right? Like I kind of
Mm,
mentioned, right? I started, 15 years ago doing this kind of stuff, even before I was into Salesforce. So it was super easy for me to just stick with it and build it into my schedule. But it does get hard. I do get burnt out and just take
mm,
breaks, right? I don't upload any content, but what really drives me are those like comments on YouTube or a LinkedIn message that says like, "Oh, you really solved this problem, right? This XYZ problem. I was stuck on it for days, and you showed me exactly how to install Data Loader or
yeah.
how to do this loop." And like those kind of comments, they really like they go a long way to giving me motivation and making me like stick with wanting to do this stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great and inspiring and can certainly relate to kind of almost listening to your body a little bit just to make sure that you aren't doing too much and don't burn yourself out. I think that's an important part of it too. And yeah, I do bits and pieces within the ecosystem too. So I can certainly relate to kind of almost making that part of my daily routine and kind of sliding like a podcast in here and a YouTube video in there and a blog in there, and it's just at the end of the day, I guess becomes part and parcel of what you're doing. So that's great. Kind of thinking about now if there's somebody that's looking or thinking about this path, what tips or advice would you give them if they're looking to start out?
For development, there are a
Mm,
lot of different paths that you can go down. And I'd recommend just starting out in a specific area that you may like. So first, you got to figure out the areas, and there might be front end, back end, and like some of those terms might be like, "What the heck is front end and back end?" So review some of those things. But I would say just get started, right? Just get
mm,
started looking into some dev aspects. And on the advocacy side, I would say figure out what your medium is, right? If you
mm,
like to write blog posts and that really gets you fired up and you can like you don't feel like it's a drag when you're doing it to get it done, then stick with that for I like to do things in quarters, right? So stick with that for a quarter and then reevaluate at the end of those 3 months to see where you're at and if you still like doing it. For me, I like video content. I actually
mm.
kind of like writing blogs for me is a huge drag because it's easier for me to just spout things off and then
Yeah.
cut all of the areas that I've rambled on too long about. So yeah, for me it's super easy to just like hit record, talking to the mic, and of course when I was first starting out it was very awkward and like everybody hates their own voice, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But as you do it more and more, you start to get used to it and you get into a flow. So the big thing I would say is like try to be as consistent as your schedule allows it, right? And
Mhm.
as your mentality, a healthy mentality allows it. And once you get into that group, then you can start layering on other things like, oh, maybe you want to do a newsletter or have a Slack channel or
Yeah.
post on LinkedIn, right? You just layer those things on. But I think it's sharing about what's passionate for you in a sustainable way.
Yeah. Okay. And I think it is important because it ultimately you're probably going to do it alongside your current role or career, and it needs to be sustainable. You don't want to burn yourself out, as you said. I think that's important. Um, Kind of asking a question now, which I actually have a strong opinion on, and I'm curious to see if your opinion is the same. Do you think it's important for anybody that's kind of thinking about this path to have a good kind of solid admin skill set, admin background? And I use the word admin in inverted commas because obviously that term is changing.
Hmm.
What do you think about that?
Two things,
Mm.
and I don't know if we're gonna get controversial about it. There are I think some of the best developers have an admin background.
Mm.
I started out as an admin. I was going through school, got an internship. I was an admin, didn't know anything about Salesforce, right? I was an admin, and then we hit a roadblock, and they're like, "Oh, we got to ask the developers to do this." And I was like, "Wait a minute, I know how to write code. Like, let me
Yeah.
just give it a try, right?" And from there, it's just history, right? I just stuck with it. So having that administrative background was super helpful in me once again, like understanding all the tools that I know that I could use. That being said, though, like I think some of the best developers are admins. I don't want people to stop, like to get stuck or to stop learning development because they feel like they need to have that administrative background first, right? I know a lot of people who
Mm.
are super interested in learning development, but they kind of I'll say got stuck, or they focused way too much on learning administration and they just never got into the developer aspect of things. And at some point, like, that can be okay. Everybody, there's plenty of admin jobs and you can be very happy with being an administrator. But at least when, like, I was working with them and talking with some of these individuals, right, it's like I knew there was a lot of passion with learning code and programming. So that's all kind of like pushed to the side as of
Yeah.
right now. And I think the big thing is, like, you can totally break in just jumping straight into development, right? You learn those important things that you need to get, like, that administrative foundation. Like, of course, your objects, fields, and all of that stuff. And then you just dive headfirst into development and you learn the rest along the way, right?
Mm.
It's I think it's okay from that standpoint, but there's definitely, you'll be in orgs where there's validation rules written in code, and you're like, oh, this could be a regular
Yeah.
role of validation rule. Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really about, like, not to stop learning once you're in that, like, developer role, but
Hmm.
to also get that configuration aspect and knowledge as you're going through.
Yeah. Well, good news is I don't think that's controversial at all, considering you pretty much agree with what I think. I think it's important to understand, like, for example, what lead conversion is and what it does, and why you shouldn't build your own process to do the same thing. Because I've been in many an orgs where I've gone in and I'm like, okay, why is this here? Like, you could just use the standard lead conversion. You don't need this visual force and this apex and whatever is behind it. So I think that's super important, and I'm glad that we align there. So
It's really
yeah.
about the education aspect of things, right? Because you can
Mm.
easily start out, let's say you learn Java or learn Apex and just how to write all these different structures and triggers, and, like, you could stop there. But, like, Salesforce is so much deeper, right? You can really dive into what's the best solution, what's the best practice for getting some of these things done. What have other developers or systems, how do they work? And that potentially starts diving into, like, architect type things, but having, like, a good team around you or people that you can talk to and ask questions is super helpful in those types of situations.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where online communities like the ones that you've talked about, like, can really play an important part, because ultimately perhaps you are working on something and you're the only Salesforce person in your company, right? It's good to just be able to say, well, actually, am I doing this the right way? Would you do it the same way, or is there a better way? Something I'm missing, right?
Yeah, I'll definitely throw out, right. The Salesforce Mentor Slack is great. I was a big fan of the Salesforce Ohana Slack, or if you're
Yeah.
into Discord, there's a Salesforce Exchange Discord. Like I'm big into all of those communities because
Yeah.
they have helped me when I was solo developer or solo admin, and just kind of like grown with them. And there's tons of really smart, great people and helpful people in all of those different areas. And I'm sure there are others, right? Those are the ones that
Mm,
I just hung out in as I was going along.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. So, reflecting on your own journey a little bit, but if you were to start again, kind of becoming somebody that's advocating or trying to get people on the developer path, is there anything you would change or do differently?
I would, I don't know if it's dangerous or not, but I would consider like doing it full time for a year just to see what happens. Right.
Mm,
I've always had a job, and I think that that has helped me out to learn what Salesforce development is like, and be in a bunch of different orgs. But it's always that like what if of like, oh, maybe you took a year off and did a bunch of speaking and just like
yeah.
wrote blog posts all the time, which I think that's just more a little personal for me, and what I would try out. I would also say like maybe partnering with different types of people more. So you've got this channel and this series about talking with more people, but there's definitely times where I was like siloed and like let me just make what I think is interesting, and like there's that opportunity to branch out a little bit more and kind of like lift up other people, bring them onto the channel, and see like get some
Mm,
other thoughts and knowledge as it goes along. So I think that that's interesting. Like always learn and always try to never try to be too close minded, and keep your ears open to like other what everybody else is doing and how you can help
mhm.
each other out.
Yeah, I think that's important, and I can sense a theme here in terms of kind of elevating people up, lifting people, and ultimately like debating as well, because there is
Mhm.
going to be more than one way to achieve the same thing. The right way will depend on, I guess, the pros and cons, right? In terms of what are the trade-offs for doing it this way versus that way.
Yeah, you give the quintessential consultant answer, like, "Oh, it
Yeah.
depends, right? What works for you doesn't
Yeah.
work for them." And it's like, let's build out an SOP or
Yeah, no, exactly. Is that is the typical consultant answer, but I can't help it at this point. It runs in my veins, so can't get away from it. Um, Kind of picking up the speed a little bit, but if you were to kind of summarize skills attributes that it takes to kind of pursue this path, if there was like a top two set of skills, what would you choose? What do you think is important?
Yeah, on the just general developer side, I would say be okay with being stuck and embrace
Mm,
the pain that comes in with not knowing something. I will often like maybe once a day, and I'm just like I have no idea what this is. Like I've been
yeah.
doing this for almost 10 years now. It's like I have no idea what I'm looking at, and that is okay. Like when I run into that, it's a learning opportunity. And I will get a lot of students that they maybe haven't experienced that as much, and when they get stuck, they shut down. And
Mm,
I think for being a good developer, you need to kind of embrace the stuck, right?
yeah.
And then figure out how you can move forward. One of the, I guess, the funniest things, and you'll see like memes about it and things like that, is like when you have an error on your screen and you make a small little change and you see a new error, and you need to be excited about that, right?
Yeah.
You're happy that at least something is happening and it's not the same exact thing. So I think that's an important mindset to have. And
Mm,
then just also like some of that like uh problem solving, and that's potentially more general, right? But everything that we're doing, especially in Salesforce and coding, is problem solving, right? So
yeah.
it's putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else, and then maybe thinking a couple steps ahead of help make this work like long term, make the like figure out how to improve their lives, even if they potentially don't even know that, something that they've been doing for years can be improved upon, right? Like
Mm.
that's something that is super fun and super important when you roll out a feature and they're like, oh, I didn't even know this could do this, and this is saving me tons of time a day. Like I can go do other stuff. So that's really fun. But yeah, I think it boils down to like embracing the pain that comes along with it, and then trying to like have that problem solving mindset of like everything's a problem and everything can be solved, which is pretty fun.
Yeah. And I think I can certainly relate to that error thing about kind of progressing through different errors. It feels really good when you actually get the authentication to work, but then inevitably you would have structured your call or done something that is then invalid. So it kind of, you almost like going up a flight of stairs, right? Sometimes with errors, you go past one and then you've got to get past the next thing. So can certainly relate to that.
Yeah, totally agree. It is a blessing and a curse, a battle that you have to go
Yeah.
through. But for me, and maybe it's like I think they say you get dopamine hits once you finally like complete
Mm.
the code and it saves correctly and runs and so maybe it's those little things that I'm like addicted to dopamine hits and stuff like that when I'm getting my errors done. But
Or addicted to the attention when you just shout out yes in the office and everybody turns around and they're like,
yeah,
what's just happened?
and
Yeah.
everything okay. It's all no. I got a new error,
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah,
All
yeah.
good.
Okay, awesome. Well, I've had a great time having this conversation today, and I'm glad that we're aligned on some things as well, because it makes these conversations a little bit easier, I find. So before we do go though, you've now got an opportunity to kind of demyth something or clarify perhaps a common misconception that people have about kind of getting into a developer type career in Salesforce. Is there anything that kind of comes to mind there that you'd like to clarify for our audience, do you think?
It's important, and I love this question. It's important to understand, like, I'm no genius. People have called me, like, talk to me, and they're like, "Oh, you're probably super smart." And no, I was a very average student. Like, I got C's, sometimes worse, like going through school. And I think on the developer side, it's really about like that passion and interest in problem solving, and then
Mm,
getting that foundation right. I keep bringing this up because as soon as you're like at that base level, you see so many different things in a different light, and then you can go down a bunch of different paths to
yeah.
learn development and to understand different areas, right? You don't need to be a coder and sit and look at walls of text every day, but it really opens up your understanding in a lot of different areas of pretty much anything you do. So I think it's important to kind of learn and get that foundation, and don't think like it doesn't matter your age, your race, your sex, your anything like that. Like
Hmm.
you can learn it. So it's totally open, and there's a ton of resources that you can use. You can always message me to find some. Of course, start on like Trailhead and all of those things. And um, I think the door is like definitely cracked open to
Yep.
learn this kind of stuff. It's just about taking that step to push through and embracing the stuck and the suck of being you know the
Yeah.
debugging and all that. But once you get past it, you see the patterns and you'll start to move a lot faster and learn different things in development.
Yeah, and I love that, and in fact, I might get that on a sticker now, "Embrace the errors," because I think that's such an important message, as well as obviously the door being open to anybody. Doesn't matter who you are, anybody can do it, as long as you put in the time and the effort and use some of those resources, you could pursue this path if you wanted to, right?
Yeah, I want to bring up just one other thing real
Mm,
quick on the kind of like the learning journey, right? I have a
yep,
very traditional background. I went to school for this stuff, but they're talking about being the door open and things like that. You can be a self-taught developer and be very successful, right? I've met many different devs that are self-taught and they could code me into a box, and that's okay, right? Like I encourage that because you definitely learn one way like when you're going through school for computer science and stuff like that, but with all the resources that are available, the different paths, free paid whatever they are, you can really learn kind of whatever you want. So I think, like I mentioned, development is an open door, and regardless of your role, I recommend you to kind of at least learn it a little bit, so that it's you. Anytime you see it as, oh, this is for the smart people, this is for the wizards. Anytime you're saying that, I want to reduce that amount of saying, so we're at a
Hmm.
level playing field as we talk.
Yeah, I think that's really sound advice there. So before we do go, there's an opportunity now for you to share any resources or ways for people to connect with you if they want to learn more. Are there any kind of resources and kind of ways for people to connect with you that you wanted to share?
Sure. The biggest one is on LinkedIn. So of course, I'm Walters954 pretty much everywhere. So connect with me on LinkedIn and Twitter and those kind of things. And then of course, yeah, I guess plug YouTube, right? So
Yeah.
make sure to like and subscribe. But
Yeah.
the you can find my YouTube channel, Salesforce Mentor. I talk about a lot of different Salesforce topics. And if you have requests, I take requests. So let me know from that side. And then just going a little bit deeper, right? I've mentioned Salesforce Mentor, so I've got that Slack channel going, and you can like join on salesforcementor.com. And then if you're looking to get like very deep into development, you've maybe dabbled around and you think you want to go a little bit hard and learn it for the next couple of months, definitely check out Cloud Code Academy. And I guess we'll be talking a lot there too if people sign up for that.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time today. It was great having this conversation with you.
All right, Tom. Yeah, it was great talking with you too. Thanks for having me on. And I like talking about development stuff, so I appreciate you having me and sharing your platform.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks. Thanks for tuning in to Be More with Tom Bassett. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave any feedback in the comments.